question. It stood out to me in the last episode of talking to your students at John Jay College, all NYPD offices, and you presented to them an immediate problem of what do you do if we had a biochemical attack right now? And we never got into the details of what do you do right now. I think there's a lot of value for us to talk about that so that for every member of law enforcement that's out there watching and for the people who are not in law enforcement watching can be prepared. This COVID virus, we hear from all the experts in the field that this may appear again for a second wave. So that being said, why not take the opportunity to try to educate some people, give them a little bit of an edge, if anything. So I present to you, what do you do if we get hit right now with a biochemical attack, aka COVID virus type event?
Yeah, so just to give it a context, I created this course titled Counterterrorism Policies for Law Enforcement a few months after 9/11. So I'm posing the same question every semester for the last 19 years to the members of NYPD, and unfortunately I get the same answer. They all look at me and they don't know what to do. So what do we do? And this is things that I teach
You do
them.
this in every course.
Every course for the last 18
And no one
years.
comes up with an answer what to do. Even if people, I'm going to guess by now you've had some people who've taken counterterrorism, or they're in counterterrorism.
I have people up to assistant chiefs in my class.
And they don't have an answer what to do right now.
So some of the more high-ranking over the years would tell me it's on a need-to-know basis. And my answer
That means
to
they
this
don't know.
if it's on a need-to-know basis, there is no basis for me to think that you have anything.
Right.
Because the nature of contingency planning is dissemination of the information. This is not for need-to-know basis. This is everybody needs to know. And I have a formula that I developed for this, and I teach the students how to handle this, even though they're not necessarily in a position to implement, because changes to prison structure, changes to personnel structure are not necessarily a decision of a student or a couple of students, regardless of their rank, in my class. So this contingency plan for a disaster like this, whether it's a biochemical attack or a virus, is to create a function, crisis coordinator, for each precinct. And in each precinct, this individual can rotate. It doesn't have to be a job for life, because who wants to be a crisis coordinator for life, but for a couple of years. And there are responsibilities that this person will have for each and every precinct. First of all, knowing exactly who is in the precinct. Why it's important? Because people have different skills. You have people who have some background in health. They can be used, as medics. They can be used as coroners. They can be used as people who can actually help supplement the health workers. There are people who have background maybe in planning. NYPD has an enormous.
We have electricians, nurses, EMT work. We have everything.
People who are in the military. People have skills. So crisis coordinator needs to know the skills again that are relevant to a disaster. I don't want to know that you know how to write poetry for a time. That's nice, but that's not relevant. Having this list needs to be updated periodically. I would say twice a year, because people move, are transferred. So I don't want to see a list from 1917, for 2020. So one of the major function of crisis coordinator is to be up to date with the equipment. What kind of equipment you have in the prison that will be necessary, valuable, essential if something happens. Whether these are masks, whether these are any other types of protective gears, whether these are gloves, anything of that nature, the crisis coordinator is to be hands-on, knowing how much is needed, creating a stockpile if needed, not someplace in Brooklyn if you have a precinct in Manhattan. You have to have it on a precinct basis, because there is no time. Time is of essence if something happens. The crisis coordinator has to have a good sense of what's in the precinct in terms of locations, hospitals, emergency rooms. In Manhattan, for example, they have these places when you can just walk in, medical care. You can just walk in. You have to know where you can direct people, whether the cops or anybody else, if the hospital is overflowed.
Sure, you have urgent care centers in every precinct.
yeah.
What are their hours of operation?
What are the possibilities of extending these hours? Right? The crisis coordinator needs to know what is the possibility of bringing more cops to the prison if needed. We talked about last time about getting the people who retire,
right.
the retirees, maybe some other people who
What cops
have the
live in
skill.
that precinct that are retired?
Absolutely. I mean,
Can
there's
come right
an
in.
entire list that we build and create, and then the cops create a hypothetical attack. The hypothetical attack on the precinct is not always biochemical. It depends on the group that they're dealing with. But what's important in this attack is that it forces them to get to know the prison, because I tell them to identify all the possible targets. It shows them the way they can evacuate people from various locations, which is also part of the responsibility of crisis coordinator. If I have a major target in my precinct, or if I have a major hospital in my precinct, I need to know, how do I maintain the flow of the people in and out, how I can evacuate people, where I can evacuate people. Google Earth is a wonderful tool, you know. You don't have to walk the streets and smell the smells. You can identify all these things, you can map them out. Literally takes a couple of days to put this together, you know. People talk about resources. We need resources. You don't need resources. I mean, identify one cop per precinct, not going to break the bank, right? I mean, you can do it. And this responsibility, and I always say it's very important, has to be tied to the position, not to the name. So not, we know Ed or Maki are the crisis coordinator. No, because tomorrow Ed and Maki are someplace else. So people need to know,
this is what I do.
This is the function, and I don't care if it's Ed today or Maki. We listen to that person, because the crisis coordinator will take charge in times of crisis. And the crisis coordinators will tell people, not necessarily how to deploy, but certainly work very close with the CO and XO in terms of advice, how to deploy people, where to deploy people. This is just for times of extreme, so nobody has to be fearful for their rank or their position of authority or another leadership figure. This is for emergency. In times of emergency, we have to sort of put down our ranks and put down our
This ties into, even though we talked about with leadership, if I am the supervisor in charge and I have a crisis coordinator who is a police officer, I take that person and I take his advice. What are we doing? And I invoke the authority based on my rank. So it's really...
It's an informed, and
right.
it's an informed
It's
decision.
the smart people we circle ourselves with.
Absolutely.
Right.
And one of the things that I also emphasize, because I also ask my students, how many of you are ever consulted about what needs to be done in your precinct when there is a terrorist attack? What do you think are vulnerabilities? And nobody raises their hand, because it's always top down.
Right.
But who knows better than the
people in the
big
street.
cop? Who knows better?
I've been saying
Who
this for
knows
years.
better?
The
Who knows
person
better?
at the bottom knows how the company works. Even on the assembly lines, when you think about car manufacturers, the guy putting the tires on knows more about that car than the guy running the office.
Of course. And there are different levels of knowledge that are needed to make the operation successful. So nobody's trying to take away the power of the rank, of the authority of the rank. But there is knowledge that a beat cop has that there is no way that somebody who is an inspector or deputy inspector has, because the last time they walked the beat was 10 years ago. And even if they walked the beat a year ago, and even if they were in the car, they didn't walk the beat. And this is something that I always say, that the biggest asset for any law enforcement department, and especially in NYPD, is the patrol force, right? Patrol, get them out of the cars. What happened to the foot patrol? I always ask, what happened to the foot patrol?
What's happened is, over time, we became more of a community-minded, dancing bear type of police department, rather than a department that was filled with going out and, talking to people. Even though you're hearing we're doing that, it's not the sincere ways. When you hire good people, you train good people. You never had to train me to talk to people. I got in an elevator, I talked to whoever was ever in the elevator. It was just the way I grew up. It was the way I was kind of trained from my upbringing. I shouldn't have to teach that to people in the academy. Respect is something that you should know. and it's just common courtesy that you hold doors, you have that,
You
so
know-
you learn that way.
Yeah. One of the things that I also said that is a must in this situation is to put this crisis or contingency plan on a NYPD and other police department intranet. So anybody has the access to go in and to look at this and say, well, something is happening here that doesn't make sense, right? This building is not in existence anymore. There is something else here.
Right,
There is
updated.
updated. And people would say to me, students, cops would say to me, but somebody can penetrate this. Okay, so hack to this. So what? So what? So let them hack to this. It's not a secret how
Some
to
of
make a
it's public knowledge anyway,
nuclear
right,
weapon,
right.
right? All this is out there. You're not showing anything that's, that anybody can really use.
Telling you
against.
there's a building out there in the street. We all know that.
Intranet for the cops to have their input, to go there, to make it mandatory, once a week, once a month, whatever, once in 6 months. You mentioned last time that cops are qualified twice a year with their weapons, which is to me also an absurd, because it's not enough to even know how to.
And we're only shooting at paper
Whatever,
targets.
but
right.
it's a different story. But this costs money, I understand, to qualify people. It doesn't cost money doing roll call. Everybody log in now into our precinct crisis coordinator website. Do you have any comments? 5 minutes. Look at the time. Look at whatever is there that seems outdated. Something that changed yesterday. You include also, in case of terrorism, you include the political situation around the world. There was a terrorist attack, let's say, in Mumbai, right? So you send your representative to Mumbai to see what's going on.
Which we do
there.
have stuff that's monitoring global
Right.
events. But
you have to do it as far as pandemics are concerned also. There is an outbreak of Ebola, let's say, tomorrow in Senegal. But we do have Senegalese people in New
here
York
in New York
City.
City. Right.
Maybe we should be thinking about it, that maybe some of them brought Ebola to New York City right now. We should not be dependent upon World Health Organization or, federal government or state government to tell us there is an epidemic. I know that this is almost like giving law enforcement another function, which I'm always against, because I always say the police are here to do everything, right? Everybody's calling the police for everything. But this is a critical function that actually police are structured to do.
The police
Identify the
are
threat.
they're a different step than the military, and yet the functions are very similar, but different. And we're out there 24/7. We have people with all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of equipment, and the more information we have, the more resources we have. Our ability to respond. September 11th, I worked September 11th. And when everything was happening, the Trade Center got hit, I was in Brooklyn, the 6-7 precinct. No one knew what the next steps were. And I remember one deputy inspector coming in, telling everybody to get suited up, we're at war. And to me, that was the battle cry at that point. And we started getting accountability for our people. Where were they? But we waited hours for direction as to what you wanted us to do. And what we ended up doing was we had thousands of cops lined up outside communications in Brooklyn, waiting for direction from headquarters that everyone believed was basically wiped out. And I had words with a captain, not surprising, that we have thousands of cops standing outside 9/11 communications, which could be a target. Why are we standing in front of this building like that? We didn't learn anything from back then. And, to the people, if it happens right now, what do you do? Like, these are great plans. But for every cop working right now, what do they do? I'm shopping in Macy's. I'm riding the subway. Something happens. What's my first reaction? What do I do?
And they have the almost uniform response. I report to my command. That's not a real response. Your command, you are in Manhattan, your command might be in Brooklyn. Right. What are you reporting to your command for?
Right.
Yeah? The bridges are down. Right. Where are you going? Right. What can you do based on your skills, on your training, on the crisis coordinator function that the crisis coordinator will define for you, because again, you have the medical skill, you have some sort of a medical background, you have some sort of a engineering background, you have some sort of a background that will qualify you to immediately take charge, right? You know how to control traffic. Not every cop knows how to control traffic, right? I mean, I don't have to tell you.
Not everyone. Take a look at New York City.
Yeah, I would say, take a regular cop and then tell them to control traffic. We're going to have a pandemonium.
I always use the example to non-cops that commute to the city every day. And we see throughout the year many, many times a fire in the subway system, and the subway system shut down, tracks are shut down, and people are trapped in a train with smoke. And they're in panic mode. And every one of our cell phones has a flashlight, but no one carries a little mask or a handkerchief to just give them something to do. It's the little things like that make a big impact to thousands of people during a particular event.
Of course, and it's good that you actually mentioned the fire situation. Many cops have firefighter background or something. I know many cops who have fire. Many. Right. So here already you have, if you are in the subway, you know what to do in case, of panic, in case of smoke inhalations, things of that nature. You take charge. You're empowered by the organization to take charge in the time of crisis that happens. And right now, it's not happening. Cops are socialized to go by the rank. Well, I'm going to...
I got to wait for direction.
As we did on 9/11. Wait for the sergeant. Wait for the lieutenant. Wait for the captain. And even during 9/11, as we've learned, some of the orders that were given were wrong orders, not necessarily NYPD, but the fire department. And I told people to stay in the building. I'm not staying in the building. That's...
it just came down.
Just came down, and I'm in the next building. Right. I am out. I'm not staying. But people were told, stay in your office. Right, because you're going to.
Well, no one ever believed that the buildings would come down.
Yeah, but
that was who would think the buildings would come down? No one did.
Yes, but this is the beauty of learning from the past.
Right. Buildings come down.
The past. Right. Things come down. Right. Epidemics come down. Earthquakes, tornadoes.
What do? Hurricane Sandy crippled New York City.
I just got an email yesterday from a former student of mine who is a professor in Tennessee, in Chattanooga. They had this tornado there. A few days ago, nobody was prepared. Well, first time you had a tornado in Tennessee? No, right? Lessons learned. We constantly see it. People, are without power for days, for weeks. It's almost each time there's a surprise. And there's this say from the Israeli police that I always carry with me, never be surprised by a surprise attack. Because nothing is really a surprise. Things happen. If things happen, it's not a surprise.
Well, people don't believe that it's going to happen to them until it happens to them. And, everyone leaves for work in a day. They plan to come home for dinner. And, unfortunately, some people don't. But no one thinks it's going to be them, right? I got chest pain. It's probably gas. And you take a heart attack. No one thinks that's going to happen to you. But you have to think of what might be. The same with police officers. I don't get paid for what I do. I get paid for what I might have to do.
Right. But it's also a leadership thing. If you don't think that, your chest pain is gas, it's on you. But if you are in charge of me, you should be able to tell me, Maki, go to the hospital, right? You handle yourself the way you want. Right. It's true. I preach and I don't do it. I ask people in my class, how many of you have enough food for a week? What happens if the ATMs are down? How many of you have cash that will last you to buy? And do I have it? No. Right. I bought it now. But I was teaching about this for 20 years, and I didn't do it because I also have this optimistic side. I know it's hard to believe because I'm the queen of darkness, but yes, I also have this optimistic side.
Queen of darkness, that might be the next introduction we do. Queen of darkness, that's new.
I do see things in dark shades, and people tell me, there's always a chance that it happens. So when it happens, you are right, and you feel good. I said, I never feel good.
Well, you don't want it to happen, but it's the nature of what we do that we have to anticipate that it can happen. We keep hearing this pandemic, the pandemic with the coronavirus will come back. Yeah. So what should people do if it's going to come back? Obviously you don't stock up on chopped meat now. We're talking a fall, but there are things that should be planned ahead, even from the government's perspective, that we shouldn't be scrambling at the last minute to get medical equipment and
From,
things like that?
from the organizational perspective, I used to do research in 3 different police departments for over 2 years, one in North Carolina, one in South Carolina, one in Florida. In South Carolina, it was in Charleston, South Carolina. And they have this amazing police chief who was there for 20-something years, and he was very, very progressive and have amazing ideas. And when I walked in first time into his office, there was this organizational chart in his office, and he had like 40 different units or 50 different units. I said, Chief, you only have 300 cops. How come you have 40? What do you have, two cops per unit? I said, yes. I mean, this is just in case. And he said to me, you see this unit? This is the hurricane unit. I do have only 3 cops in this unit. But I rotate my cops through this unit. So some of the things that I'm saying to you, I've learned through my research. It's not that I was sitting in front of a crystal ball and I'm thinking, let's have a crisis coordinator. I've seen this. And sure enough, South Carolina was hit with various
Many
hurricanes,
times.
right?
Right.
So it was good that this entire force at a certain point was in this hurricane unit that at any given time was only 2 or 3 cops, but they would rotate. And he said, other than the fact that cops like to be in different units and he has a pin for the unit, I am a pin, this is a pin from the hurricane unit, this is a pin for crowd control unit. But this was his way of delivering sort of in-service training in a way,
Which goes to what we said previously about a crisis officer. Technically, he created multiple crisis officers.
Yeah,
by
absolutely.
teaching each person for each disaster.
Absolutely. He would rotate the cops. So because his entire force was about 300 cops, this is what gave me the idea to bring into the precinct level, because these are the number of cops in the precinct, right?
Well,
200, 300,
yeah,
more or less.
Depends on the precinct.
Right, but we
could be
don't,
300.
Yeah, could be, or to be 200.
Right.
We can do the same thing. Let's create this
Rotate
function,
them in and out.
rotate cops so they know. So when next time I see them in my class and I said, Ed, what do you do if there's a biochemical attack? You'll tell me, I'm going to be in charge in mask distributions to all the cops. I'm going to make sure that each and every cop has 5 masks, because right now they only have a couple as far as I know, right? Go on.
1 or 2, and if you need another one, you got to go back to get it.
Okay, or wash during the shift, you're going to wash your mask.
What should really happen now is, in anticipation for what comes, the NYPD should furnish every cop with proper equipment. They have masks that are out there that are good for 30 days. They have them that are washable. We should be purchasing them now and gearing up for whether it be the fall or the next 5 years. They're still good. We should have a stockpile of equipment, and we should start to implement some type of training to answer these questions as to what do you do, how do you process X, Y, and Z situation.
And I can assure you that there'll be no resistance from the cops on this, because
they want it.
They want to
it.
have the
Right.
skills.
They want
These are real skills. Right. This is not the type of skill that the department trying to give them when there's some sort of a crisis. Suddenly there is fair policing training or whatever, something that supposedly.
I've spoken with hundreds of cops during this time period. They're angry that they didn't get what they should have had. Many are sick. The biggest concern was their families, that they didn't want to take it home. They do blame the department and the city for not preparing them and putting them in that type of crisis. Yeah. There's no understanding as to what this virus is. And the big thing is that we didn't have the equipment. How could we not have equipment after 20 years of 9/11 attacks?
And even taking it a step further to what kind of different criminality we're going to face on the streets after this is over,
Good
right?
point.
So the economy is down. There'll be a lot of unemployment. People, it's not that there's direct correlation between unemployment and criminality, but there is enough correlation between unemployment and criminality, because at the end of the day, you have to put food on your table or your children's table, right? So if you don't have money, not steal. Enough food banks, you're going to steal. Right. Or you're going to engage in drug trafficking, or you're going to engage in any other type of criminality that maybe before you were as far away from this as, you're away from the moon. That's one thing. The other thing is people are drinking like crazy, right? The liquor stores in the city.
Essential workers.
Essential workers,
Essential
people
workers.
standing outside, the supermarkets have less crowd than the liquor stores. And there are liquor
stores
stores on
cannot
every
supply,
corner in the
right.
city,
Right.
It's funny because I was in Dublin a few years ago and was invited to one of my former Irish students because the Garda Síochána sends students to John Jay. So I have quite a few students in Ireland. So I was invited for dinner. I wanted to buy a bottle of wine or something. There were no liquor stores in Dublin. I couldn't find a liquor
No
store.
liquor stores in
No
Dublin.
liquor
I've never
stores in
been there.
Dublin. Okay, so I'm telling you.
So it's all a myth about what they say about the Irish. I
They-
can ask these questions. I'm Irish.
They drink in the bars, but there are no liquor stores.
Really?
Really. I mean, I was with another cop from New York, and he also said, "Where are the liquor stores here?" So, but in New York, on each and every corner. So, bringing it from the anecdotal to real, there will be people who are going to be drunk on the
Addicted,
streets,
sure.
addicted,
More homeless.
homeless.
Unemployed,
This is a
yeah.
new type of criminality that we got. Desperate, suicides. We know that after depression,
Sure.
and we can compare this to times of depression, people commit suicide, people abuse their significant
Domestic
others,
violence,
domestic violence. How do we prepare our officers to deal with this? Do we prepare them? Not now, because now we are in times of crisis, so maybe training is not the first
Well,
thing,
it
but
may
it
be
should
smart to have
to start thinking
someone handling what's going on today and someone starting to plan for what's coming
Map it
next.
out.
Right.
Map it out.
Right.
We talk constantly about predictive policing, about predicting the next crime wave based on what happened in the past.
Well, the predictive policing in the past didn't work too well.
Of
look
course,
at- look
because
at the
again,
place.
I'm not sure who is handling it and how, because it's not just about what happened yesterday, what's happening today, and what will happen tomorrow. There's a number of factors that have to do with predictive policing that are not always taken into consideration. People know what they are, but they're not always taken into consideration, sometimes because of the political reasons, You don't want
I
to,
find it
you
after
don't want
many-
to project certain things.
They want to create the atmosphere that everything is good. And I think that the truth of it is, for elected officials, you should create the atmosphere of what's reality. People deserve to know what they're living in, what the conditions are, what they should do in the event something happens. And they should also realize that nothing's foolproof. You're not creating the perfect atmosphere for everything. That's why we put locks on our
This
doors.
is a very important point also, as you're saying. I'm thinking not everything is foolproof. Going back to what police can and cannot do, right? The police cannot disperse a crowd of 10,000 Hasidic, mourners.
Funeral, right.
Not going to happen. So learn how to deal with this. The police might not be able to deal with all the homeless. So then who should be dealing with them and how? The police, for sure, this I know for sure, are not equipped, cops are not equipped to deal with the stress that they're experiencing now.
Absolutely, that's
Not
the problem.
equipped, not equipped. What do we do about this, right? What do we do? Because obviously the city is not thinking about this right now. What do we do within the organization about this? The other thing is, this is I also hear from some of my students, there are areas in the city that people congregate, not for funeral. They congregate. They don't keep the social distance. So what the cops are told, okay, drive by, tell them to disperse. They drive by, tell them to disperse. Do they disperse? Of course they don't disperse because they don't give a damn. They don't want to disperse. So what do you do? How do you not compromise your authority as a cop? Because if I tell you to do something as a cop, I have to rely on your compliance.
Correct.
If you don't comply,
Then I don't exist.
you don't exist. Next time you come, they flip your middle finger.
Right.
I mean, that's it.
Give 3 to 5 immediate. What would you do if you were going to lay out 3 to 5 points to tell a cop in that classroom? What would you do right now, or to a member of the public? They're in the street, something's happening. Now, I guess each situation would be different. I'm sitting in a secure classroom versus me walking the street and a building is coming down. Or a bomb goes off and there's a massive explosion, right? We've seen this with explosions. We've seen several terrorist attacks in the city. I think the first reaction from the general public is, what am I watching? And what exactly is taking place? And, oh my God, this is real. Yeah. It hits them. Now they don't know what to do.
Yeah. It's a little bit complicated in the sense that it requires additional and different training than the one officers receive right now. You need to train police officers in verbal communication compliance, authoritative speaking. Because if I am a cop and I pull up my badge and my voice is sort of low and my command presence is not there,
No one's listening.
no one's going to listen to you. But there are ways of teaching people how to communicate in an authoritative way. There are ways of giving people these tools. And I'm not saying that one cop can gain immediately control over panicking, hundreds of people, but given the situation, we have to try our best. So give them the communication skills that they know. I see it with my police officer students, not just NYPD, because I have police officers from all over the country and all over the world. They have problems with communication skills. They cannot present a PowerPoint effectively to a class of their fellow students. I need to instill in cops the authoritative communication skill. I need to give them skills in crowd control. Crowd control, to me, is one of the most underestimated topics for training. Because crowd control, especially in densely populated environments like New York City, it's more important than teaching you how to shoot. Not going to start shooting in the crowd, but you need to know how to control, how to disperse, how to create various zones. One of the things that we do in Israel, we create 3 zones when an incident happens, when there's an active incident. We try to close the zone when the incident is happening. It can be an explosion, it can be some sort of, again, the first incident of an attack, of a biochemical attack or something. Then the second zone is where the forces that's supposed to respond to the incident congregate, and the third zone are media people and people who are reporting about this, and everybody else, you push them back. Now, to me, each and every cop needs to understand how to create this. And unfortunately, with NYPD, what I have seen over the years, there was this guy who was scaling the Trump Tower a few years ago. I don't know if you recall,
Sure,
he had a
yeah.
backpack. Everybody was there underneath the towers. And I'm thinking, I'm watching this on television and I'm thinking, what if he has explosives in this backpack? I know that there are various ways of making sure that maybe certain explosives are there, but there are certain explosives that you cannot detect no matter how sophisticated the equipment you have, and I'm not sure if NYPD has this equipment, but for the sake of argument, let's say they have. What if he has some explosives? What if there is some secondary device already there, and this building collapses? It's all made of glass. There'll be so many casualties because all these people are downstairs. Just people will be killed.
Interesting that's an example, because that's exactly what took place on September 11th. We had the bunker right below the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
And where was the command staff? All in a bunker.
So giving this skill to cops, create the zones, remove people from where things are happening, evacuate them, tell them to leave. This is not a simple skill. You have to work with people. The Dutch police is very good at this. They have people who specialize in controlling dangerous situations. That's the training that they deliver. How do you control dangerous situations? It's actually about dispersing hooligans after soccer games, because they're very violent there. But it's similar. You're dealing with hundreds of thousands of
Big
people,
crowds.
crazy, on drugs, drunk, and the police has to disperse them and minimize possible damages. So all these crowd control situations are very similar. And the Dutch police has tremendous modules of training developed for this. Why not to learn from them? Why not to bring this training? Why not to give it to everybody?
A lot of the problem is that we don't spend for the training. We don't train the cops, and you'll hear that we're trained, but talk to the cops, and you get the cops in the school. They'll tell you we're not getting.
They all tell me that the courses that we give them within the certificate that I run, which are in leadership, in counterterrorism, in ethics, and in in bureaupathology, which is basically how organizations function, which
Right.
goes into the structure. They said this should be mandatory at the academy.
So they all love those courses.
They love those courses.
But they all say we're not getting it here.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I mean, I didn't know that, but I just told you that. We're not.
Absolutely.
I learned recently that our tactical training is beyond what people would think. Our retirees go to other departments, and I'm going to highlight down in Florida. You can go down to Florida, retire from here, become a cop, and then they run you through a tactics course. Almost every NYPD officer that goes through the course fails. And they never receive the tactical training that's put in place in other police departments. They don't take it in the sense that, gee, I failed and everything. They actually embrace the training. They want the training. But we're not putting that effort into it.
No, I said through many training modules of various departments around the country. Texas is very good. The Texas Department of Public Safety out of Austin has an amazing academy. And they have leadership training and use of force training that is completely different from any other training that is out there. There are places to learn from. It's not something that is some esoteric knowledge that one person has and we have to pay them $10 million. No.
It's really about money. Law enforcement, NYPD is the brand for law enforcement. It's globally known. It really is incredible in so many ways for the things that we do and accomplish. But when you get down to the people at the bottom that we know runs the department, they are not given the resources that are needed. They're forced to do things, just like with the pandemic. They were forced to respond. They were sent back to work. There's anger that they didn't have the equipment. There was anger that they're being sent back to work and someone was sick and everything was unknown. They were not valued in the sense that they should have been. And that applies all the way through the food chain as far as training goes.
But it's not just the training. And again, I'm a training person. I was always say that the training is deficient. I'm sorry. That's from what I see around the country, around the world, that's not the training. And you talk about money. Training, to me, is not about money. It's about taking whatever money is spent right now on whatever it's spent and turning it upside down.
And I agree with
Completely.
that. When I say it's about money, it's that they don't want to spend the money. But training costs money to
spend.
send.
You cost already. So give me this $1 million hypothetically that you're spending on use of force training, right? And I will take this $1 million and create a very different module on use of force training, and you won't have to spend additional millions later.
And lawsuits.
Right. Because you have to suddenly introduce fair and impartial policing. What kind of reaction is this? Fair and impartial policing is the basic training that every police officer should receive at the academy.
You shouldn't be getting a job if you can't be that way.
Yeah, right. I mean, this is the basis for any police training in a democratic society. So don't spend all this money just because there is the need to show that something is being done.
Well, that's why they spend the money. Some lawsuit occurs, some political issue occurs, some judge gets involved, and the next thing, look, this is what we're doing.
Because again, and without pointing fingers to any specific commissioner or any specific deputy commissioner for training or any director of training police academy, people need to have background in training and in education to run a police academy and not to learn on the job.
That's true.
Right?
Right.
So
what's training really about?
There are plenty of people out there who have degrees in education and in training and in police training already. It wasn't the case years ago, but today there are enough people who specialize in this. Bring them and appoint them to run the training, and you will see changes and you will see differences. If you continue to appoint people just because somebody needs to be appointed to a position for whatever reason,
do you foresee that changing as we go forward?
I have to be optimistic on this. Otherwise, I will just go home and watch television and say, okay, I'm going to retire in a few years and to hell with this. But I cannot say to hell with this because I devoted my life to this. I'm a big believer in training. From my own experience, I've done so many bad things. And I'm saying this, bad things, not wrong things, bad things as a cop because I didn't know any better, because I also received limited training, right? I always say this, and I said it, I think maybe last time we talked, juvenile cops. Juvenile cops should not be young cops who don't have families, who don't have kids. Juvenile bureau should be staffed with people who are parents,
right.
who know better.
Understand kids.
Understand kids. Understand the
Which is true,
dynamic.
because until you have kids,
What do you know?
You
No,
don't
you
understand.
You have no sense. You don't understand how they act. You don't understand the dynamic between
teenage
the
years,
parents.
infant years,
Of
sure,
course,
right.
of course. So that's just one example.
Right.
Training must be there. And again, training can be accomplished in today's world with minimal amounts of money, because so much is available electronically. So much can be downloaded to cops' phones, and they can be told, you have to look through these modules the next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever. You can do it during your downtime on the job,
I mean, we have universities that are teaching, master courses on.
Yeah, but there is this. This is a British initiative, the British police, and they have this concept that they came up with about 4 years ago, 2016. I was in CPOL. CPOL is a European Police College for Training, and the British police was showing something called Serious Games. Serious Games, they develop software for cops to download to their phones, and it's in a game format because their target audience are the younger cops, obviously,
Sure.
Who
are used to the games.
Yeah,
right.
used to the games, and they deliver training like this with their smartphones. And so yes, so the police department purchases the Serious Game package, and then
It's
cops
scenarios to
download
run through.
scenarios.
Sure.
So really, it can be done with minimal budget. It's just you have to open your mind. You have to start thinking, looking at other departments and what you can learn. Maybe NYPD can offer, the best training module in tactical deployment, but maybe, somebody else has something in community affairs or ethics or.
Right.
Or the Serious Game concept, or the Israeli police can maybe, you can download the crowd control techniques and creation of the zones, or when there is an incident. Everybody has something to offer, and police departments, they want to offer this.
Do you think that, off-duty cops for the most part carry a firearm, okay? Mm-hmm. And in the general public, it'll be a second question, I guess, but do you think that off-duty, back and forth to work, that people or officers should carry a couple items with them in the event something were to happen?
Absolutely.
A little face mask, or
Absolutely.
maybe we should give some thought to that, and next time make some suggestions for people of what's the best practices to carry with us.
We carried a whistle in Israel. Do you carry a whistle?
No.
Why not? It's a great crowd control tool. It's a great crowd control tool, really. How
That's a good
put
idea.
in your pocket. Gloves, mask, a whistle,
I do carry a lot of stuff in my car.
But
I
not a
carry
whistle.
I don't carry a whistle. There may be one in a bag, come to think of it, but I'm going to say no.
If you have to find it, then you don't
No, I
carry.
have a bag with a bunch of stuff, but I know people carry tourniquets, things like that. Because you could just help any individual get hit by a bus.
Yes.
You could help them do that.
But I mentioned a whistle because it's a great crowd
It
control
is a great
tool.
great tool for crowd control.
Tool for crowd control. And it's funny because when I look at my old pictures in uniform, I see I had this, this whistle was attached to like it was something on my uniform that goes on. And people say, "What do you have there?" I said, "It's a whistle." And I said, "Oh my goodness, you were a cop like in 18th century." No.
Everyone was issued a whistle. Everyone. That was the way it used to be.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's great.
It
People,
did.
you immediately
Just traffic. We use it all the time.
attention. You
Right.
get people's attention, right? How do you get people in? No matter how skillful you are in communication skills, still, there's
Can't yell over a whole
level
crowd.
of decibels.
Right. But people look to see who's blowing
and
that
today
whistle.
there are whistles that have a tremendous power. Also, there are whistles and there are whistles. Purchase it by yourself, even if the department, doesn't want to give you this as part of your equipment. There are tools that police officers used to have that for whatever reason disappeared, probably some political correctness.
Someone had an idea that just was not a good idea.
It was a great idea.
Well,
I always go back to original
That's a good point,
policing
because I remember using those years ago. We use it just directing traffic. And think about it, getting
And
people
again,
out of a crowded building.
how many cops today know how to direct traffic? That's another example that needs to be instilled. Every cop should know how to direct traffic, especially in New York City. If you're policing upstate New York, you don't need to know how to direct traffic. in a densely populated environment. I will never forget walking the streets of Manhattan during the blackout in 2004, 2003. Walking from East Side to John Jay.
You couldn't get around.
It was chaos. Citizens started to direct traffic.
Right.
People, I'm going to direct traffic. No, I'm sure there were quite a few cops in this crowd, but somehow they did not materialize because this was not part of their protocol.
It's something.
Right?
It's so true. Is that there are cops right now who are off duty. There's thousands of them walking the streets of the city.
And
Thousands.
former cops, right? Former
Thousands
retired
all over the
cops.
city.
Many people who have the skills. You know, one of the things that we have in Israel and here, you know, it's not necessarily well developed. Although there is this auxiliary police force, right? There is an
Which we
auxiliary
have, but I think
police,
it's a little bit different.
Yeah, but in Israel, it's very different because most of the people were in the military, so they have the skills.
Have a background.
So they have the background. But there are 70,000 of those in Israel. And just to give the context for this, the Israeli police is about 22,000, 21,000, and then there's 70,000 auxiliary people. So if something happens, you have 3 times as many to supplement you and to help you out as the entire force.
And a lot of people look to volunteer anyway. They look to get involved. So why not use the people who have the skills?
Absolutely.
Right.
So you have this case. So this, going back to this function of crisis coordinator, this would be another, you know, you're asking 2-3 bullets. This would be another responsibility. Know who are your auxiliary police officers in your prison that you can mobilize, right, in case of.
Which would all be there. I mean, we do have
Exactly.
that in the prisons, but what you're talking about is a much more
I'm
sophisticated,
talking about
common sense plan.
sophisticated
Right.
plan that everybody is familiar with, that everybody has an input. There are things that
And someone's willing to listen to.
You know, policing actually is a great organization because a lot of people listen because they have to, as opposed to other organizations. Somebody tells me to listen, and as a college professor, I can go to sleep. I mean, there's no repercussion for this. People in policing are sort of socialized to listen. Sometimes, you know, they hear more than they listen, right?
Right.
But I think it's easier to socialize people to understand why it's important, especially now. That's the time for change. Right?
I think there's a big
That's the
awareness
time
right
for
now.
change.
Right
That's the
now,
time for change
right
now.
now is an opportunity. There's awareness. People have realized that life as we knew it can come to a standstill, and it's just not for a couple of days. This lasted for quite a while. It's still going on, and everyone's looking for this to end, and it's just going to take some time.
Yeah, but it's not just about this ending. It's also about this.
Not letting it happen again, or being prepared for it when it does.
It will be different now.
Right.
And so this is the time. This is the time to introduce things that maybe if we spoke a few months ago, you would think, what is she talking about?
Right.
What is she talking? What was she drinking? You know?
Right.
And right now is the time. And why not to take advantage of this? We always have to take advantage of a catastrophe.
You learn from
Let's do
it.
it.
We learn from history. So that being said, anything else?
I think we're good.
I think we're good. We'll see you next week.